When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to a florist, but my high school was within walking distance of a hospital, boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes during the week of Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital by my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads, populated with specialty doctors' offices that keep odd hours, and the sort of buildings where traveling doctors mainly hold surgery consultations or perform small procedures a few times a month. The trip there passed without incident. As I was walking back through said deserted roads with a vase of flowers in tow, I noticed an unkempt 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of the car is hazy, I am left with the impression that there were at least two men within whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed that the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason that they weren't passing by. So I made a point of dramatically trudging further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them that they could safely drive ahead. They still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicions by matching my speed, despite the impracticality of my shoes and the threat of spilling water from my vase. I commenced to run as quickly as I could, but they hit the gas and they matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was following me, that there was no place in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking lot that I saw. The car turned in after me. And despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot, and there being no other sign of activity at the office, this car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me into this partially under construction back portion of the slot behind the office. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back, vase in hand, and I jumped from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land with sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after I had reached the top of the rubble pile, and was now nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was following me. I sprinted at top speed, and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter, and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to give a crap when I told them, possibly because our hometown is supposedly a trafficking capital, and the crime rate is outrageous. Although I am convinced that this was something more informal than trafficking, as the dilapidated car suggested poverty. And I've read trafficking usually arises through grooming and not being taken off the streets. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, alerted campus security, and called the non-emergency line of the local police station. But I was young, foolish, and insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus, when I didn't have a signed permission form permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself that I had misread the situation, or that I was overreacting. I don't know what I would have even told the police had I called them, as I was entirely ignorant on the subject of cars, and couldn't have identified the make of it if I had been asked. and I couldn't see the faces of the occupants. I was also worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew that I'd been in danger. I feel horrible for having never told anyone, and honestly hope that my secrecy hasn't led to someone being hurt. I believe the only missing people aside from runaway children or elderly adults with dementia in the city right now, though, are men, aside from one woman a few decades ago. Whoever followed and tried to trap a 16-year-old with flowers at a doctor's office, what's wrong with you? This happened when I was 5 and my best friend was 6. A quick layout of our school. The building was L-shaped and the short end was not in use at the moment, and cars could stop to the right of the L, in full view or behind the short part, mostly obscured. The road was pretty much in a square around the school, but only in the aforementioned places cars could pull over. We were at school one day and she did something that had made me angry. She grabbed my colored pencil without asking. I wanted revenge. Shortly afterwards, recess had started, and about halfway through, I saw my best friend walking towards the back of the short building, and I followed her thinking that she was going to do something fun. When I rounded the corner, I saw a man in a car giving her candy through the open passenger door. Well, trying to. My childish mind thought, why doesn't that guy just step out to give the candy? Now he's holding it just outside her reach and she has to climb into the car to grab it, and his seat will get all dirty. My friend had one knee on the car seat, reaching for the candy now. I suddenly realized that this was the perfect time for my revenge. I would stop her from getting candy from this man. So I yelled at her that she wasn't allowed to be this close to the road. We would get in heaps of trouble if we were caught near the road instead of on the playground, and that I would tell on her. This caused her to jolt back, and she ran away from the car, back to the school playground, taunting me with the fact that a passerby thought she was so pretty that he wanted to give her candy but not to me. Apparently a teacher saw me walk towards the road and was on her way to fetch me. So she was just around the corner from us when my friend started taunting me. She heard what was said and quickly ran the last few steps towards us, frantically asking us, "Did anyone get in the car? Did you see any classmates get into the car?" She was clearly panicking and the car was long gone by now, having driven off when I yelled at my friend. My friend answered, "No, the nice man just wanted to give me candy, but she said that she would tell me, so we ran back. I really wanted that candy. Are we in trouble now?" The teacher escorted us inside, had all the other teachers count heads, everyone was there, and talked to the police that were called. Neither me nor my friend knew what was wrong at that time, until their parents came to fetch her and gave her a stern talking to about accepting candy from strangers, saying things like, "We've talked about this, and we have plenty of candy back home." My mom was proud of me because she thought that I had listened to the stranger danger talks and protected my friend. I didn't correct her. A few years ago, my best friend and I were talking about our old school, and this day came up. We both just realized that if I hadn't been so obsessed with those colorful pens, or if she had asked before taking them, that she could have been taken and suffered a pretty bad fate. She couldn't believe how stupid she was for thinking that a random guy would really offer candy to kids from his car, especially since her parents had warned her about strangers before. I just felt embarrassed for not recognizing the situation from the talks that my parents gave me, and being so focused on getting revenge. It took me a while longer to fully realize what could have happened to her. I don't know if the guy was ever arrested or did anything else, and after this incident, my school started permanently posting a teacher as a lookout near the road. As far as I know, there were no more incidents at that school, and it was never really spoken of again. The official reason for the lookout teacher was to prevent students from running out onto the road and getting run over. When I drove past last year, they had put a fence all around the school. I'm guessing it's because they finally realized a fence is cheaper than paying a teacher an hour a day to just stand around. So, when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at a park down the street from my house, waiting for the school bus. Usually, my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls that were waiting there, but this day, I was the only one. So, I sat at the bench and had one headphone in, and one out so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it, because I didn't want to look crazy. But after a few minutes, two big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and that these guys were creeping me out. Of course, he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and two guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was two men. I didn't get any responses. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and I walked towards the street, because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late. As I stood there by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel their bad energy. One guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just gave them a small smile and a nod, and then I looked away. And then the same guy, I'll call him number one, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number two, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. And then number one kept asking me yes or no questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? And do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some, do you want some? And then number two asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body, and I got the chills. Number two, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me that they just got back from Russia, but the way that he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they had drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. And then number one came up to me and asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here. Sorry, I gotta go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they had asked me questions. But before the bus got to me, number one handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him if I ever need anything. He even stated that he would give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on it to report it. And so I took it, and they walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and it picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused, while the men were there. But as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me, but thought that I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there is an incident, so that they can notify the school. She continued to pick up all of the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. And then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and I handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call them to act like my dad. And so he did. It was on speakerphone and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it was burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said that his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off. Then eventually, it disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and the security as soon as the phone had clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police, and they had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything that they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in, and they asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they had wanted. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him, as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mom, and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out so fast, they were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her instead that she went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that that girl was also saved by the courageous kids at our high school.